What's up, Govy people? Let's get cracking here. So we are gonna go over last week's lesson of Iranian political institutions. This week we're gonna quickly look at Nigeria. You have an assignment posted on Canvas. That is to look at basically the major themes that surround the development of the Nigerian state. We'll go over that Wednesday. But today, let's quickly go over the Iranian political institutions. And then there's a short little Canvas discussion posted. And I want you to write down after you look at this and after you look at your own notes, besides the supreme leader, which institution in Iran do you think has the most power? And I want you to explain that answer. That way, when you go on the Canvas discussion, you can see what other people say. You get a better understanding about how these institutions hold power. Okay, so what I would like you to do is, if you have your reading notes from Iran that I gave you before the break, take those out. If you don't have those, this is the same assignment that I posted to Canvas last week. So you can bring that up and write down notes as we go. Also, what I would do is I'd have a piece of paper, a notebook, a pencil to write down some major concepts that aren't necessarily on this, but really help kind of tie this all together, okay? So let me share my screen, share, get rid of that, show you this. Okay, this is the first term that I want you to know. Iran is something called a hybrid regime. A hybrid regime is the idea that it is intentionally set up to be half authoritarian and half democratic. It is not supposed to be a democracy. Russia, its framework, if you read its constitution, it is a democracy, but it is something called an illiberal democracy because although it is supposed to have free and fair elections, civil rights and liberties, those things are not always granted, so that is considered illiberal. China is authoritarian because it's not supposed to be democratic. Iran is a hybrid regime. It has elements of both democratic and authoritarian government. So let's go over these institutions kind of down the list that I gave you, and we will talk about how they interact with each other. So the first one would be the supreme leader. The supreme leader is obviously constitutionally the most powerful position in Iran. Remember, the original supreme leader, Khomeini, he wrote the constitution, or he had a major hand in writing the constitution, which would allow him to have the ultimate say over the government. Remember the term Velayat-e-Faqih, which is he would be considered the faqih, the leader of the Shia community. So everybody under the Shia community, which what 90% of the Iranian population is under his guardianship. Things changed when he died because the next leader did not have the same authority that he had. So that will be something we'll touch back on. So his powers are, he is controller of the military. He has ultimate authority to approve or reject any law that is passed. He can dismiss the president. So sounds like he can just do whatever he wants. However, just like in any authoritarian style government, there are some informal checks over his power. So similar to China, similar to Mexico under the PRI, not necessarily similar to Russia currently, but certainly towards the collapse of the Soviet Union, you have something called factionalism. And factionalism is the division of within a group of people that have power. You have different visions about what they should do with that power. So in the CCP, in China, the Communist Party is the group of people that have power. So you have factions within that. You have people that believe you should push towards a more economically liberal government. It's people that believe that you should restrict and isolate the Chinese economy a little bit more. Those are the factions that exist. In Iran, it is not a political party that is factionalized and divided into different ideological visions. It is the clergy. So the clergy are religious leaders. Religious leaders that control all major components or institutions of the government. Those are considered the clergy. Now, within them, there are major factions. You have radicals or conservatives. A conservative or a radical, it all starts about what base they're coming from, is trying to conserve the ideals of the 1979 revolution. Someone that is really trying to conserve what Khomeini's vision for the country was. Typically a little bit more oppressive towards civil rights and liberties, on down the line, a little bit more isolated internationally. Then you can have a moderate that says we should maintain a lot of the core principles of the revolution, but look to become a little bit more modern as far as our relationship with the world. They're kind of hit or miss on civil rights and liberties. Then you have a reformist. A reformist in Iran is not a reformist in the United States. A reformist in Iran does not say we should separate church and state. Okay, a reformist in Iran says we should maintain a theocracy, but then we should push towards more civil rights and liberties. And usually reformists gain popularity as a result from pressure from citizens. So an example of that, which we'll go back to again, would be the Green Revolution in 2009 or the Green Movement in 2009. Young people pushing for more civil rights and liberties, more voice in elections, etc. So that's really gave a little bit more power towards the reformists in Iran. So Supreme Leader, definitely constitutionally the most power, but no, as far as informal power, there are checks over them. Okay, and they come from factions that are within other institutions. So the main institution one of the main institutions that we're going to talk about next would be this called the Guardian Council. Okay, I actually pause. So before we get to the Guardian Council, let's talk about, there are two sets of institutions. Remember the hybrid regime? We've got elected and unelected. So in Iran, you have a universal suffrage. That means suffrage isn't a bad thing. Sounds like it's suffering. It means that everybody can vote. Okay, you've got men, women, anybody over 18, used to be over 16, can vote. Only for some of the government. So you can vote for the president. You can vote for a group called the Assembly of Experts. We're going to get back to in a second. Or the parliament. Those are the two major ones. Okay. The parliament is the Majlis. And that is what it's listed on your paper. And then the president would be the top list. So you can also, what happens is, let's get to the Guardian Council. They are appointed by the Supreme Leader and the judiciary. There's 12 of them, 6 from the Supreme Leader, 6 from the judiciary, but they have to be approved by Parliament. So you see this kind of hybrid position where these are unelected institutions that appoint members of this institution, but they have to be approved by elected institutions. Now, once they get their job, this little red line is an important red line, okay? What they can do is they vet and disqualify any candidate towards the presidency, the parliament, or the Assembly of Experts that they don't feel represents what the clergy is looking for, whatever that might be, really whatever faction happens to be on top. And that has actually become more reformist or progressive, for lack of a better word, as the further away we get from 1979. So the Guardian Council, like for instance, in the last presidential election, well over 50% of the candidates, I don't know the number, well over 50% of the candidates were not allowed to even run. Okay, so you have a democracy, but not really, because the Guardian Council can kind of stop people from even becoming on the ballot, similar to what the CCP does in China, where it says, well, you can run for office, but you might not show up on the ballot. So, or you can vote, but not everybody can run for office is probably a better way to say that. So Guardian Council, their major job, their major role would be to, there are other functions, but we're going to quickly go over their biggest position would be to vet candidates on the Democratic side of things. Assembly of Experts is an elected institution. There are 86 religious experts that have to be vetted by the Guardian Council. Keep in mind, these are the Guardian Council highest ranking kind of religious figures. Ex-presidents serve there. Actually, the current Supreme Leader was in the Guardian Council before he was Supreme Leader. And they vet who can be on this Assembly of Experts. The Assembly of Experts really has one job, and that would be to appoint and review the fitness of the Supreme Leader. So theoretically, they could get rid of the Supreme Leader anytime that they wanted. Now that doesn't happen, more so for kind of informal powers, and the Supreme Leader is the head of the kind of clergy and the factionalism there. So he can kind of pull the strings behind the scene to make sure that nobody actually gets on the Assembly of Experts that would want him removed. However, this is kind of a check over their power to make sure that they are mentally and physically fit to do their job. So the Assembly of Experts, major power there. Expediency Council. So Parliament, let's get to the Expediency Council here in a second. This is an unelected institution. Parliament, which is the Majlis, they make laws. They make a specific type of laws, something called Qanun, Q-A-N-U-M. And those are non-religious laws, laws that have no really like divine or religious principle behind them. So they don't violate Sharia law, which would be the religious law. If they did, then they would be struck down either by the Supreme Leader or the judiciary. Okay, but you know, speed limits and things like that. That's a pretty simple explanation, but those are the things that would be considered Qanun. So what they do is, if they pass a law that all of a sudden the Guardian Council says, hey, you can't pass that law, that is a violation of Sharia law or religious law, then the Expediency Council, their position, their job is to mitigate or some problem solve this relationship between these two institutions. So really their job is to settle disputes between institutions, okay? Next job, president or candidate is elected. The president is actually probably growing in power as we go on in Iran. The current president, Rouhani, is the first reformist president ever to be elected. Keep in mind that he has to have the support of the Guardian Council. He has to have the support of the Supreme Leader. And the other thing that I talked about, 2009, the Green Revolution, probably explains why he has the support, because in 2009, a reformist candidate was running and he was disqualified. He wasn't disqualified. He was actually allowed to run, and people thought that he was unfairly, or there's a lot of voter fraud that allowed the other guy to win. So then the Guardian Council, there's major protests. Guardian Council opened up candidates a little bit more and allowed for a little bit more diversity. Rouhani was elected. So president, their job is to manage these types of things, okay? And international, head of government, basically, international relationships, et cetera, et cetera. They're also in charge of the cabinet, just like any president would be, which oversees domestic issues within the country. So the cabinet is in charge of the bureaucracy. That is the next piece. And this is kind of a major form of employment in Iran, like other countries like Mexico under the PRI, kind of a form of clientelism. But again, this is where the clergy comes in. So there's a group called the Banyads, which is kind of like funded by the government, but is not really part of the government, that gets a lot of jobs appointed to them by the president through the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy are unelected government officials that are directly overseen, not religious in nature, directly overseen by the president. Parks Department, things like that. The DMV, right? These are the bureaucracy that are overseen by the president's cabinet. Okay, the Majlis is the legislature. That is, they make laws. Remember, those laws can be overseen by the Supreme Leader, by the Guardian Council. Basically, they can be overthrown if they are seen to not represent religious principles or violate some sort of religious principle. And then the last one would be the Majlis. The Majlis, I'm sorry, the judiciary. Judiciary is an important thing. They are the head of the judiciary, the Chief Justice. They also appoint 6 members of the Guardian Council. The Chief Justice is possibly the second most religiously educated clergy member. They interpret Sharia law and figure out if the Majlis creates law that violates Sharia law or not. So that is a significant power that they have. Okay, it is a very quick overview of institutions, checks and balances in Iran. The most important thing I want you to consider is the idea of informal power, specifically factionalism, and then how the authoritarian part of government oversees the democratic part of government. And I think you'll understand it at that point. Okay. All right. Look forward to hearing from you guys soon. Have a good day.